Well, good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening. Depends on where you're joining us from. How about happy Monday, everybody? I'm Carrie Fonte. I'm with Reuzel Education. We are so glad to have you joining us this morning for yet another Scumbassador live demonstration here on Facebook. Katy Dickson is our Scumbassador today. One of my favorite educators. She does an amazing job. You'll get a lot of good stuff out of this. Any question, comments, thoughts, or feedback you have for Katy, just type it in the comments section. I will interrupt her at an appropriate time. We'll make sure all your needs are met. And with that, Katy, I'll stop talking and I'll let you take it away.
Hi guys, thanks for tuning in. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started in the cut. So today I'm going to be doing a bit of like a modified modern mullet. If you see, my model here has a ton of hair back here that we're going to be keeping and kind of continuing to grow out, but slightly tapering down at the edge. And then we're going to be doing a pretty high taper up through here at a 1. So I'm going to go through the baseline technique and just sort of how we would blend a tighter baseline into a sort of longer back. So with that, I'm just going to get into it. First thing I've been doing is assessing his scalp and his hair texture. He's got a lot of wave and a lot of body to it. He's got some cowlicks going on, but that will all be controlled with the way I'm going to comb it. So you really, when you're going in and starting your preliminary parting, you want to make sure that you're not parting it against the natural hair patterns. So when you have a really strong whirl in the back, you don't want to comb too strongly against it. You almost want to comb exactly how it lays. Otherwise, you're going to be dealing with hair that's been cut that shouldn't have been cut. So I'm going to go ahead and just spray down the whole thing. I use the hair tonic in my water to help break down any product or any hat hair or any just dirt and grime. It sort of works as it's a hair tonic, but it almost has astringent-like qualities. So it really works to break down any product, even grease products that are in the hair. So I want to make sure that I'm saturating the hair completely and not leaving any spots that are less damp or are extremely damp compared to others. Because with even saturation, then I'm going to get even tension when I go in and do my clipper over combing. And I prefer to start my clipper over combing wet and then go in once I blow dry and refine that out. Also with wet hair, I'm able to create sections more effectively rather than trying to comb and clip dry hair that has all of its hair patterns. I'm able to have full control over the hair. And I'm also able to see how the hair would style and how it would look with product. So I'm able to kind of see what it would look like if I put product in it. And I'm just sort of assessing, still now wet, kind of his wave, where his recessions are. Because based off of the recession and the head shape, that's where I'm going to define my baseline. So using 2 combs, that's where I'm going to find where the actual corner of his head is, and then base that off of also where the recession is. My model here has a really strong hairline, so he doesn't have very strong recessions. So I'm really able to just use his head shape and not have to worry too much about exposing the corners and creating, weakness in those recessions. Because the nice thing about the baseline technique is that I'm able to keep and maintain weight through the recessions. So I'm right-handed. I'm going to start on my right side. And now we're coming to the back where he has a really strong whirl. Let's see if that's high enough. So the lighting isn't great. So when I come back to make the line for my primary parting, which defines my baseline, I'm going to want to go just slightly under his really strong whorl back here. Because I don't want to go in and cut that. So you see we have, it dips down a little stronger than a usual primary parting. So now I'm going to go in with my first cut, which is going to be right above the ear, because the ear tells me where the flattest part of the head is, and that's where I want to define my baseline, so I can use that to create the most square shape. So I'm just going to start by combing everything up, almost creating this like very exaggerated duck butt pompadour sort of look. And just push everything up into the baseline. I'm going to be doing clipper over comb. And I always do clipper over comb with closed. Because I find when you're clipper over combing with the open clipper position when on adjustable clippers, you're getting less tension in your cuts. And you want these cuts to be very, very defined. You don't want to have to go in and keep cutting the same section over and over. So I'm going to move up to the front. So I start behind the ear, move up to the front, and then I move to the back below the crown. And because we're maintaining length, usually I would just define a square, but I am going to be slightly making the back part of the baseline longer. And the way I'm doing that is with over direction. So I'm actually moving where typically you would not want any over direction when you're doing a completely square shape, but because I'm trying to maintain that length, I'm moving my section slightly back towards my initial cut. And that maintains length through the back because I'm moving the section forward. So before I move on, I want to make sure that I'm checking for balance in the baseline, because if I don't check for balance in the baseline, then the entire haircut is going to be imbalanced. And once I go in and blow dry, I'll literally be able to see a lopsided cut. Because the structure of it will be imbalanced, because the whole top of the head is cut to the baseline as I blend it down. So I'm going to be doing just a little bit of clipper over combing, because most of what I'm going to be doing through his front is I'm going to be tapering it down with a 1. So I'm just working to remove bulk right now and to get it ready for when I go in at the end and taper him out to a 1. So the way that I clipper over comb using the baseline technique is I'm actually moving from the baseline down. So my guide lives above the spine of my comb, because the spine of my comb is my cutting line. And the way that I find you can easily blend into the back when doing the clipper over comb with these sort of modified mullets is you're going to comb everything forward and do a diagonal comb position. So right there, I'm already seeing I have it blending up into the front. I'll move on to the other side. I don't know if it's COVID or if it's that baseball season is back, but it seems like this haircut and this hairstyle has been frequently requested more recently than ever. Maybe because people have grown their hair out during COVID, even though COVID's basically over here in Los Angeles, but that and mustaches, lots of mustaches. So I'm just going in again, debulking and blending into the back. And now I'm going to move on to the top, because basically everything else that I'm going to be doing is going to be all scissor cutting or is going to be refining with clipper guards. So now that I've got the basic shape, I can go into the top and start my preliminary parting, which that starts with a middle part, because we're going to be doing a balanced cut. And then I'm going to define the crown, corner, and front. It's going to be a 6-section parting. So the way that I find the crown is I place the comb on the top of the head and find where the apex is. So I can see where the head is flat, and then where it starts to round down, that's where I'm going to define. Right before that is where I'm going to define where the crown is. I'm going to comb this all back. And then going off of the recession, and also when the head starts to round downward, that's where I'm going to define my corner. So that is my crown, corner, front parting. I'm just going to go in, replicate it on the non-dominant side. Now he prefers a little disconnection up in the front and the corner of his head. So I'm going to be blending into the baseline, but leaving this front a little disconnected. Even though it'll still be connected to the baseline, I'm going to use my finger angles to create that extra length. So starting at the flat of the head, which is right above the ear, which is always where I want to start. That first cut is going to be brought to the baseline. And then I'm just going to be pulling every section above that down to the baseline, which sort of works in the same way a graduation would work, where I'm over-directing downward, but I'm making sure that when I'm holding my baseline is kept at 90 degrees. So I'm not obscuring my initial guide. And 90 degrees is parallel to the ground, completely flat, where if you placed a marble on it, it would just stay stationary. It wouldn't roll forward and it wouldn't roll backwards. So now I'm going to move back to the crown. And this is where my partings are almost going to seem diagonal, but they are still parallel to the baseline because we're creating straight lines on a round object. And using the baseline is really important, especially back in the crown, because I'm able to maintain length and weight through the whirl. So I'm not cutting it too short or creating any shapes that wouldn't be desirable and then would have to either be texturized out or slammed down with product and just hope they don't notice. You're avoiding creating a problem for yourself, because that's usually where most people have issues, is with cutting the crown. So now I'm going to move on to the front. And the way that I do the front is I'm actually going to take from my non-dominant front section, and I'm going to be taking my first section horizontal to the hairline. So that hairline in front, so our hairlines, even though it's round, if you kind of like point it out, I'm creating a horizontal line to this side of his hairline. So it ends up being, I'm going to tilt your head slightly, ends up being sort of a diagonal line, but it really is horizontal to the hairline. So using my finger angle, because he doesn't want too much taken off the top, using my finger angle, I'm going to drop very, very low. So a lot of the time when you're connecting to the baseline in the front, this type of finger angle, where it's just a little bit of give off of the head and is sort of pointing downward, that's enough to maintain weight and length. But since we want a little bit of that disconnection and we want that exaggerated keeping of length, I'm going to really drop my finger angle. So I'm almost pulling his hair downward, but I'm still connecting to that baseline right there. And then I'm over directing everything over this way. Some hairs are popping out, and that's okay, because we're just going to leave that length, and then connecting with my previous cut. And I'm going to take another section, also taking from the other side, horizontal to the previous section I took. I'm going to over direct it again. I'm starting nearest to my baseline, finding that same finger angle, dropping it, making sure that I can see my guide underneath. I'm going to take one last from the front section. And I can see that there's no more to cut in this front section. So I'm going to move on to my non-dominant side and replicate what I did. So at this point, I've lost a lot of my partings because of working with the front. So I'm just going to go in, redefine it. And that's the important thing about using the head shape for creating your sectioning, because I've lost all of the sections that I created on my dominant side, but I'm able to know exactly where those sections need to go. Because it's based off of the head shape. So I can go back in and easily put those partings back in and do the same. So for the sake of you guys being able to see, there we go. I'm going in, always starting above the ear. I can see his previous cut was cut in a way where this side was left longer for everything to be parted over this way. So even though I'm taking off a little more hair on this side, because my baselines are balanced, I'm not worried about that, because that just shows me the old shape of the cut rather than me thinking, oh no, I'm creating a lopsided haircut. Having the
Katy,
base, yeah, what's up?
I know that we always stand right in front of our work, and you're doing a great job managing the camera and cutting, but your arm is just blocking a little bit. So can you move the camera or stand a little off center?
Yeah, so I'm going to stand a little off center just so you guys can see what I'm
Thanks so
doing.
much. For the viewers watching, Katy had a camera person was going to help her. They had to cancel, unfortunately, and she scrambled this morning to go buy a tripod for her phone. So we really appreciate you, Katy, making this work. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of some direction. I'm like a film director now here. So thank you.
I appreciate it, Carrie. Yeah, I need that because my eyes are on the haircut, not necessarily on the playback. So I'm going to stand slightly behind, but still, so you guys can see that way. But usually you'd stand directly in front of your section, especially when you're cutting behind the ear, because you don't want to over direct. But I'm going to be very careful about where my hands are placed so that I'm still creating that square shape. Slightly turn this. And I see there's nothing more to cut. So now I'm going to move back into the crown. And again, like the other side, see if I can get this tripod higher actually. There we go. Oh. Can you hear me?
You were gone, Katy, and I was on the camera. I didn't realize it, and I was
Yeah,
doing emails.
because
I'm
I
like,
was trying to adjust. I was trying to
all
adjust
right, let me
the
take myself
tripod.
out. Welcome back.
Yep. Thank you. So I'm going to slightly bring this down. There. I think that's going to be much better because now we can see sort of above the cut. So now that I've moved back into the crown, I'm still going with the horizontal sections. Bringing it down to the baseline. My baseline is being held at parallel to the ground. I'm just moving through. And I'm going to replicate same thing I did with the front through the back, through this side. So I'm starting with combing everything over so I can see where his hairline is, creating that first parting horizontal to the hairline. Because I'm on the other side of the head, I'm not going to be able to have my fingers held in the same way. So I still have to replicate that finger angle, but by using the palm to palm. So I want to make sure, because I'm sort of doing this with the reverse of my hand, that I'm getting that same elevation and finger angle. And still connecting it to the baseline.
Katy, I'm just over here laughing because Bruce Wayne called me out. He's like, nice look of shock, Carrie. As I was answering some emails while you were cutting your hair. I just wanted to,
my finger hit the button.
you know what? It's live TV and these things happen. But I wanted to tell you that this morning it's like a North America viewing audience. So we've got viewers from Canada, the United States. That's where everybody is spending the time with you. So again, welcome to everybody. Sorry for that little interruption. And Katy, I'll stop talking and again, let you take it away.
Wonderful. So now I'm going to be moving on to the top. And the way that I define the top So I've already cut a little bit of the front. So I'm able to see what I've cut in the front and then what hasn't been cut through this very top section because I was over directing it down to the baseline. So this is all stuff I still need to cut. So we want something more balanced through the top. So I'm able to see what was cut in the crown and what's already been cut in the front. So I know how much to take off through the apex and the slight beginning of the rounding down of the front of the head. So I'm going to go in, define about a comb's width section. And when I say a comb, I mean a cutting comb like this, not a clipper comb, because that would be a gigantic section, because I don't want to create any over direction in this guide, because this is my top guide. So I'm going to find those front hairs, find the back hairs, and we're going to be creating just the slightest longer in front to shorter in back. So we actually don't want to take off too much length. Going in and I'm pulling this up, completely up from the head. And that's how I'm going to define my front guide. I'm going to go in and check through the apex, through the crown. And now using my guide, because now I have two guides. Sorry, the black of the, there we go. Now I have two guides. I have the guide that's already been cut from the baseline, and I have the guide in the center. So that's going to give me exactly how much needs to get cut off through here. So I can see what's already been cut by the baseline and what's been defined by my guide in the center. And I'm just working with horizontal sections so I can see my guide and see my guide and just go through that way. And then, because I'm taking a slight bit of the section I cut prior in these horizontal sections, I actually have three guides. So working with guides is the best way to give yourself a map to navigate through the haircut. So you're not just creating cuts for the sake of creating cuts. Everything has a defined purpose and every cut is completely purposeful. So I'm moving on to the left, my non-dominant side. I really don't have much to take off of this, but I can see that there is a little bit of a point where if I left that, it probably wouldn't be too noticeable, but it wouldn't be me doing my due diligence and creating a good square shape on top, and wouldn't be noticed right out of the chair, but would be noticed down the line when the haircut starts to grow out. So now that I've cut the top, I'm going to go in and cross check. So that means I'm going to be holding, since I was doing horizontal sections, I'm going to take vertical sections of what I cut to make sure. So I'm seeing I left a little bit of length there. And the important thing with cross checking is that you're not cross cutting, because you're holding up a different section and you're not going in and correcting from the checking. You're then creating new cuts. I'm going to go ahead and check this. See, there it is. So the top is completed at this point, but now since I have this weight in the back, I'm going to be doing a scissor cut back here as well. So I almost want to do the same thing that I did on top, where I define a center guide going off of the crown. So I'm going to create also square. I'm not going to round out through his crown to try to pull myself down a guide. I'm going to be using the baseline that I cut in, and that I'm going to be holding also at 90. It's really important to not round out through the crown, because then you're taking off weight and length and creating short pieces through the crown that can cause issues with styling and just it laying down. So with these slightly tapered, more modern mullets, you almost want to come down to a horizontal, not a diagonal graduation right at the hairline. So it just sort of sits nicely. So this was all held straight off of the head to then come slightly down where the head begins to round in under the occipital bone. So just like I did on top, I'm going to be doing horizontal sections, finding my guide in the center, finding what I need to cut, finding my baseline, and just working down the head. And just like the top, we don't want to take too much length off of the back. We just kind of want, see, we're already seeing it sit nicely. And we're not taking too much length off of these back corners. That's really important with these sort of mullety looks, is that you have that weight right behind the ear. So I'm gonna find my guide, and I'm just standing slightly off center from my cut, but I'm making sure that my finger angles are going along with what I need it to do. So once I get below the occipital, I'm going to hold that out using palm to palm. I'm going to go in cross check. I'm not seeing anything I need to fix. So now I'm going to go into the refinement stage, which includes using my blending shears and includes using my clipper guards so I can get him down to A1 on the high tapered side. So I'm going to start his blow dry with just a little bit of the spray grooming tonic so I can get some control. But I like the spray grooming tonic for people who don't typically blow dry their hair. So when I go in and blow dry it, I'm not creating too much of a very strong styled blow dry, because the spray grooming tonic is 30% lighter than the bottle grooming tonic, even though they are nearly identical, but I'm able to get a little bit of more lightness. I tend to use the bottle grooming tonic, and then I'll retail the spray grooming tonic because it's easier for clients to use on their own. But we have a travel size of the bottle grooming tonic, which I find people really, really like because they're able to just use that little bit in their hand and just kind of work it through. So I'm going to be blow drying him with a Denman brush, which has good tension. This is the Denman brush. Unfortunately, our AC is broken in my studio. So typically I would be using about medium heat just so I can get the hair dry, and also I can get the definition from using heat, but I'm going to be using very low heat because it's going to get really hot in here if I do. So I want to work through the bottom of the head first, so I'm not placing any dry hair onto wet hair. So I'm working through these zones, starting on my dominant side. So I'm holding my blow dryer in my dominant hand, and I have my brush in my non-dominant hand. And my blow dryer will always follow my brush. That way I can get the most out of the tension of the brush, and I'm not just blow drying the hair and brushing it, because then I actually am getting no tension with my blow dry. So I'm just brushing everything back. And then I'm going to switch to the other side. And when I switch to the other side, I am going to switch hands so I can replicate exactly what I was doing on the other side and have good body posture. So still with the blow dryer following the brush, getting this whole bottom zone dried before I move on to the top. All right, I'm going to flip back to my dominant side. And I'm going to start in the back and just kind of going diagonal back with each section and sort of pushing the other sections out of my way so I can ensure that I'm getting the section dry before going and putting more wet hair on top of it, because you never want to put dry hair on top of wet hair. And a good way to tell, especially with darker hair, is to feel the head and feel if it's still slightly cold. That tells me that there's still dampness in the hair and still needs to be dry. Because you can't really tell visually on darker hair if it's dry because it doesn't change color like a blonde or white hair or lighter hair colors would.
Katy,
Yes. Yeah, Carrie? I lost you there, Carrie. I can't hear you.
sorry about that. It's one of those days that technology is not our friend. I'm asking everybody
Seriously.
watching what you should finish your model's hair with, so we'll get some good feedback and input from them, and I'll share it with you.
Wonderful. Because I have some ideas of my own, because he typically doesn't put a lot of product into his hair unless he's going somewhere or has work. So my thinking was just to use some of the matte styling paste because it's really light, it's easy to work through, and it has a really true matte finish to it. So it's not going to, for him, it's not going to feel like he has a bunch of product in his hair that he's not used to. And also, it's going to give me the ability to still style his hair and get that nice definition and texture that I'm looking for in this cut. So I'm going to check for dampness. I feel a little bit of coolness right in the center here. So just to finish off my shear work, I'm going to go in with my blending shears. And I find it's best to call them blending shears and not thinning shears, because if you say, oh, well, now I'm going to use the thinning shears, and people think you're going to thin their hair out. And I've had a lot of clients sit down in my chair and immediately say, do not use the thinning shears on me, because they've had bad experiences where people will go right at the base and thin out their hair and create these really just unflattering thin patches. And when you put the thinning shears so close to the root and base of the head, you're actually creating sort of a, like with German Shepherds and Huskies, they have a second coat that grows underneath their top coat. You're essentially creating that. And there are times where that is appropriate, and there are people who want that, but that is usually a really rare case. And there are other ways to thin out the hair that don't create that undercoat. So right now I'm going in and just blending out that baseline. So I'm taking the same horizontal sections that I did, holding them up, because I want to refine the same way I put the cut in, or else I'm going to be creating a new internal haircut structure that isn't the same haircut. That's me not refining the haircut, that's me creating a new internal haircut. So I just want to take that visual weight line out without losing the buildup of the shape that we've created using the baseline and the preliminary parting. Do the same on this side. Out. I am going to go through and texturize the top as well, because he has really thick hair. And I could see that his previous haircut was also very texturized. So like I did with the sides, I'm still going to be pulling up the same way on top. And I like to use my blending shears almost like point cutting shears with the top, because then I get a softer, even softer texturization with the top, but I'm able to point cut a little more efficiently. Than if I was to get my smaller point cutting shears and just go in and just trying to get every little cut. I find it's more efficient for thicker hair types when you want that point cutting look.
Katy?
Yeah.
There's a question from a gentleman watching us on the Reuzel YouTube education page. Tips on a blending shear, teeth-wise. What do you like? What are you working with right there?
I'm working with a 30 teeth. I find that gives some of the softest appearance, where if you see there's a lot of teeth there. Other people, I mean, I've seen even as much as like 8 teeth sort of chunkers. And those I find you aren't going to get a ton of use out of, and you can sort of easily chunk with normal shears. So I like having the anywhere between 20 to 40 teeth, because I find that is going to give you that really soft blend, and you can still use strongly to get a lot of texture, but you aren't sort of pigeonholing yourself with like a 12 tooth or an 8 tooth or a 15 tooth where you can only get those really strong chunked textures. So I just find these are more, the 30 tooth is more of a like a general all around blending shear where I can get that texture, I can get the blending, and I don't have to go out and purchase multiple different blending shears. I only own one pair of blending shears because I have such utility use on the 30. So that's my preference. I know other people who love to collect shears and have, you know, they have every single different size and shape and tooth amount of the blending shears. But for me personally, I find less is more. Like I only actually own 4 pairs of shears, which for some, I mean, I've seen some people who have upwards of 20 pairs of shears, but I try to find what works best and has the most utility use and go from there. So that's why I like my 30s. So I'm just going in and throwing in texture to the back. And now I'm going to throw in the product right before I'm going to start my clipper taper. So usually, Reuzel, we use the knuckle measurements because that's easiest to explain rather than pea size or anything like that because you're able to just say a scoop. So this is about, even though I was using the matte styling paste, which is in a tube, I still want to use my knuckle measurements to make it easiest on myself and my clients as to how to define how much to put in. So I'm just going in. I have the product emulsified all over my hands, and I'm just going in and working this through, specifically at the base of his hair, and then kind of combing it through. I have a lot of product on my palms, so I'm able to get that last refining swoop on the ends with what's left on my palms because I want to focus the bulk of the product at the base because that's where you're going to get the most style. That's where you get the definition and the foundation of the style. So I'm just going to break this up with my pick. Just sort of break this up. That's what I really love about the matte paste that we have is that it really has this nice pliability, but gives that texture and that movement. I find it's my best-selling product. The matte styling paste, I can't keep it on the shelves. So I'm just sort of working to break this up, kind of help pull it through the hair just a little bit more. I'm going to start with the one open and go in and define my high taper. And my high taper is going to be based off of the C curve of that front of the hairline. So that's going to be my guide for where I put in that taper. And the reason I wait till the end for this is because I've basically already debulked and blended all of this. So the fade is not the most important thing in the haircut. It's the structure, it's the shape of the cut. That's where the importance lies. Going with the one close now. Going with my two. And with using guards with the baseline, you want to use that baseline as sort of the stop of where your guards are going to go up to. So I'm just blending up, flicking my wrist into that baseline. And it's just blending itself out into that. So I'm not taking off anything that I cut. I'm only taking off the things that I want to see for the taper. Before I go out and blend out the line between my one and my two, I'm just going to make sure that I'm blending up in. I'm using the stationary comb position for my clipper over comb. So I'm not taking anything extra off of my baseline, but I am blending out that visual line between the baseline and the two guard, which is a 1/4 inch of hair or about 6 millimeters. So typically with clipper over combing, you want to keep your comb parallel to the head and not move it towards you or move it away from you. But in this case, because I want to create a graduation and a blend up into that, I am tilting the comb towards me. I'm gonna pop on my 1.5 and just blend out that line. A lot of people ask me, how do you do a fade? How do you do a fade? Like that's one of the main questions I get, especially with younger barbers. But a fade isn't the most important thing. It really is your shape and structure work within the cut that will get you better haircuts. Because fading is just a system. You can learn how to fade on any clipper. You can get from 0 to 2 or to 3 with all different methods and techniques. And it's really the shear work and the structure work. That's when I think you sort of cross the threshold into sort of really mastering barbering rather than just, oh, well, he does great fades. Because I always hear complaints of, oh, I went to him, he did a great fade, but then when it came to the top, they didn't know how to cut it. And you really want to be able to do all sorts of cuts, specifically short haircuts. So we have our one taper. So we're all blended out with the high taper. We're gonna round to the back. We have all this nice weight back here. And then onto this. So you see we have that taper and it's nicely blended up. We still have that disconnect in the front because of our finger angle. And I'm just gonna go in and line them up, but that's the modern mullet. Do we have any questions, Carrie?
No, just lots of nice compliments to you, though, Katy, about your explanation and the methodical approach to give you the exact quote. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And you taking your time, and thank you to your model. Katy, when you're done, will you take some pictures and send them to me, and then we'll post them on the Facebook page so everybody watching can see the final results?
Yes, I will.
That would be great. All right. Well, thank you all for being with us today. We appreciate you. And of course, the typical Monday jumped in there and gave us some technological challenges, but we showed it who the boss is, and the boss is Reuzel and Katy and her model doing a great job for us. We'll be back next week. We look forward to seeing you, everyone. Have a terrific day. Thank you, Katy. We'll see you soon. Take care, everybody.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.